Hi everyone, this is Ellie Perry, Sustainability Manager at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Today we're going to be going over our CSUDH Sustainability Training, Communications 101. So hopefully as a result of this presentation, you'll be able to learn a few things about working with the Office of Sustainability, namely when communicating with outside audiences, how to describe the Office of Sustainability, build on your understanding of how the campus is organized, understand the importance of an elevator speech, community-based social marketing techniques, as well as general sustainability education tips. So let's get started. So when you're working with the Office of Sustainability and you describe your work to someone, some helpful things to understand about who we are is that we describe ourselves as an office. The office is currently composed of myself as a full-time staff member, plus paid student interns. Currently there are about 13. And when we talk to other people and they ask what department we're a part of, it's important to note that we're actually part of a larger department, which is facility services. So facility services is the department that manages the buildings, the grounds, the campus infrastructure. It's important to mention that we are part of a larger department and we're not an office just by ourselves. In addition to that, in terms of divisional affiliations, facilities is technically under the admin and finance division, even though the office works collaboratively with many other offices, departments, and divisions across CSUDH. So students who are working with us, such as yourselves, may be funded or sponsored by different departments, for example, that may or may not even be in the same division as facilities, but you are still managed by or work with the Office of Sustainability. So it's important to see where the Office of Sustainability falls in the kind of interrelationships of Cal State Dominguez Hills, as well as describe that accurately. So in terms of how the campus is organized, which should be helpful information even if you're not working with the Office of Sustainability, is that Cal State Dominguez Hills is composed of 6 major divisions. So those divisions are going in alphabetical order. Academic Affairs, which is the division that deals with most of the curricular activities. So most of the faculty are housed here. They maintain, that's where the 6 academic colleges are housed under. So anything related to academics is generally under this division. Now, admin and finance is another division that provides a lot of the support services to keep the university running. So good examples of this are facility services, as I previously mentioned, but also foundation, parking, finance, payroll, basically anything you can think of that's administrative and financial in nature to help keep the university running. Now, another division that you may be familiar with is student affairs. So this is the division that deals with any of the student related programming and student life. So for example, Office of Student Life is housed here, ASI, career services, housing, etc. And there are also 3 other divisions which actually are smaller, but they actually do exist as their own divisions. A good example of that is the Office of the President, as well as Advancement and Information Technology. So those are the different divisions that we have here on campus. Now within the divisions, they all have their own chains of command as well. So the highest position within the division is generally a vice president, or in the case of academic affairs, a provost. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context on what those titles mean. So in terms of positions and hierarchy, just to explain what the common positions on campus are, staff and administration have different positions than faculty and academics do on their side. So for example, staff and administrative services generally have the majority of employees are trades or represented employees. So represented just means that they're part of the CSU union. Trades is generally a specialized term for those represented employees that are working more on the facilities or building side. So that's the majority of most staff. Within that pool of staff, there are managers such as myself, generally designated with an MPP tier or classification. And generally the difference between us and the represented employees is that we're at will technically. So we aren't part of the union necessarily, and we do report or are at will employment with everyone else above us. So in terms of that tier, there is also the title of director, which generally indicates that they're head of a particular department or unit or center or something along those lines. And generally directors report to an associate vice president and or directly to the vice president within their division. So that's kind of how most departments and offices and units are organized on the staff and admin side. Now, moving on to the faculty and academic side, so this is the professors. So these are the people teaching your classes. Generally, most of them are full or part-time lecturers and or instructors. So that's kind of the main body of faculty on campus. Now, within that classification, there are also tenured professors who are fully employed by the university. They're paid to do research and teach classes, as a member of the university in that professorial role. And within that tenured professor class, generally department chairs are selected from that body. So that will be generally a tenured professor who's selected to represent their academic department for that particular area. So within that, there's also the vice provost, who kind of represents all of the department chairs, and then as well as the provost, who's kind of head of all the academic departments. And the provost has a direct reporting line to the president. The associate vice presidents and vice presidents on the staff side report to the president as well. So regardless, the president basically is the top position at the university, and all of us ultimately report to him. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding between the difference between staff and faculty, especially since you don't want to call everyone a professor or you don't want to call everyone a staff member. So it's important to make that distinction. So just a quick mental quiz. If someone asks you what your position or title, or who are you working for, what department are you from, that's all good responses to have in your head. So if you'd like to stop the YouTube video now for a quick moment, just to get your head around that, now would be a good time. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about it, but if anyone asks you, who are you, what are you doing here? Hopefully the first response is, I'm a sustainability intern, or if you're just working with us as part of a project, I'm a student, but I'm working with the Office of Sustainability. So that's important to bring up, and especially if you're going about an Office of Sustainability business. Sometimes you'll also be asked, what department are you from? And that's when you want to distinguish the Office of Sustainability as part of facility services, just to give other staff and faculty a little more sense of who they're dealing with. So now that you've kind of wrapped your head around the basics of campus infrastructure, there's a whole other class of entities on campus which actually make life very interesting when you're trying to work on projects. So there are two major categories that you should be aware of. One of them is auxiliaries. So this is kind of an interesting entity on campus, is that they're part of the campus. They share certain services, but it really runs the gamut in terms of how far on the scale they are. So for example, some common auxiliaries are the Child Development Center and Infant Toddler Care Center, as well as Extended Ed. So even though they're part of the university, they share, they have staff on campus, they're considered CSUDH employees, they run kind of separately in terms of their own costs. So they actually have their own little financial bucket. So in terms of, doing things with the campus, they have their own costs to think about. So they're very cognizant of that. So some of the services that we offer or encourage them to take advantage of, they have to consider paying for that separately. Same thing with housing. They're also technically part of the university, but they have a lot of separate staff as well as costs, but sometimes they share services with us as well. So it's kind of interesting in terms of which side of the line they tend to fall on any given issue. Also, a very interesting auxiliary is that everyone assumes that the local student union is just part of facility services or kind of has the same rules as us, and it's definitely not the case. So for example, if you've ever walked into the LSU, you notice that their graphics look different, their trash bins look different, their look is different, their logos are different. And that's because they're an auxiliary on the very far end of the scale, where they have completely separate staff, they have separate costs, as well as separate services most of the time. So a lot of the things that they offer look different than the rest of the campus because they are their own entity. Now, to take this relationship even more, to remove the relationship even more from the campus, there's a whole nother category of entities that are purely tenants, where, just like you and your landlord, for example, if you rent an apartment, they don't really control your operations, you just pay them rent. So a good example of this is camps. So the California Academy of Math and Science, over kind of by parking lot 7, that's a totally separate high school run by the Long Beach Unified School District. So basically they just rent space from us, but other than that, we don't really get involved unless something breaks. Another major tenant that we have on the whole western side of our campus that takes up a large part of our footprint is Dignity Sports Health Park, which is run by the private corporation AAG, which is essentially, a sports venue. In terms of their operations, they have a really long-term lease and are basically able to do anything they want, essentially, on that half of the campus. So that's another entity that's kind of here physically on the campus that has its own operations. And in either case, a lot of the times auxiliaries and tenants pay us us as facility services for utilities and or arrange for their own. So it depends on who they are and kind of what they share with the campus. That kind of determines their operations. So that's also an important thing to factor in when you're trying to push projects forward or push communications forward. This also extends to space territories. So for example, facility services basically maintains all the space on the main campus, as well as any of the exterior spaces, the classrooms, the scheduling for the classrooms, all of that's kind of run through facility services in terms of dealing with that space. However, parking, which is different than facilities, it's its own department, they manage anything related to parking lots. As well as vehicles on campus. So anything involving those issues needs to go through parking services. As I mentioned before, auxiliaries are fairly independent. So for example, anything that you want to do with the local student union needs to go through the LSU. Same thing with housing. Also with tenants, Dignity Sports Health Park and CAMS, you really can't go into their space unless they invite you in. So it's just like the same as with your landlord tenant relationship, right? So, basically they kind of are left to their own devices. So they have their own operations in place. So quick quiz to kind of show you how complicated this can get. So let's take a scenario. Let's say that you're trying to do an educational programming event for us. And let's say you want to make it really big. You want to reserve a room at the LSU for a guest speaker. You want both sides of the east walkway for tabling. And you want to bring an educational event to support your display. So in that case, who needs to be involved? And again, if you need to stop the YouTube video for a moment to think about this, feel free to do so at this time. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about it, but basically breaking down based on these relationships, this is actually quite a complex event, right? So for example, if you want to get those ballrooms and the east walkway directly in front of the LSU, you need to go through the local student union to place that reservation. However, if you want to get the rest of the east walkway, you would actually need to contact facility services so that you can reserve the rest of the space, since that's technically part of the main campus. And again, anything involving vehicles does need to involve parking, so you would need to apply to them for separate permission for that. So as you can see, there's a lot of pieces when it comes to dealing with the campus in terms of trying to get projects and events moving forward. So something that will help you in terms of working on your project is having something called an elevator speech ready. So an elevator speech is generally the concept that, if you go into an elevator with someone and they ask you, hey, what do? You have about 20 to 30 seconds before you kind of reach your floor with that person, the doors open, and that person leaves. So the idea is like, how do you encapsulate who you are and what you're doing in a very quick elevator speech that you can rattle off at any given time. So this is really helpful for any place you work for, even beyond your time here with the Office of Sustainability. So for example, if you're a student intern with us, it's very helpful to mention that up front, saying, hey, I'm a student intern. You probably want to mention who you work for, which is the Office of Sustainability. And just in case they don't know what the Office of Sustainability is, a quick description of your place of work. You can kind of mention our staffing system. We have a sustainability manager. We have 13 paid volunteer interns. We're part of facility services to kind of help give them a bigger picture to see where the Office of Sustainability falls in the hierarchy, as well as maybe a quick description about what you do. So depending on what you're actually doing, a generic term on what the Office of Sustainability does, which is essentially work on sustainability projects to help the campus go green, or environmental niches, depending on your audience. You can bring up specific examples of what you do or what you're working on right now. So for example, if you work on recycling or energy, native gardens, farm, communications, that's good to mention as well, so people can help you a little bit better. So definitely an elevator speech is something you should practice and kind of have some thinking points ready to go at any given time when that happens. Now, moving on to community-based social marketing. So community-based social marketing is kind of a term for a specific type of marketing. So when it comes to sustainability, we're a little bit different in that we're not really selling a product. We're, for most advertisements, for some most marketing, it involves, selling someone or trying to convince them to buy something. So what we're trying to do is not so much have people buy a physical item, but really just change their behavior, which requires kind of a different approach to marketing than what traditional marketers do versus like if they were selling you a car or a product or something along those lines. So in terms of community-based social marketing, some common techniques that work a little bit better than the traditional hardcore sales marketing that you may be familiar with is peer pressure. So peer pressure has actually been shown to be very effective in convincing people to change their behavior or do a positive action. And that's because we're social creatures. No one wants to be left out or wants to be the one, one outlier in a given situation. So things that you can do when you're trying to do marketing to convince people to recycle better or to compete in an energy competition is to provide them with social norms. So things like, oh, did you know 9 out of 10 toros do this already? No one wants to be that 10th toro that's not kind of in with what everyone else is doing. They want to fit in. So social norms are good things to build into your marketing. Also, people are by nature very competitive. They want to be better than average. So if you throw out stats out saying, for example, in general, 5 of your neighbors, use less energy than you this month. You want to be ahead of the competition, right? So that's going to motivate you to change your behavior to try to compete. And another aspect of this is that people actually perform better when they feel like they're being watched. So for example, some of the community-based social marketing case studies have shown that if you even just do something as simple as adding eyes to a poster, people feel like they're being watched, so they'll actually recycle better or sort trash or actually do the positive behavior that you want, because even if it's not real, they feel like they want to do better when someone else is watching them. So things like adding stats to your marketing, saying like, hey, we saw your energy consumption, this is how you're doing, is a technique for improving behavior over time. And beyond peer pressure, we've also found that commitments work really well. So even if it's totally non-binding, there's no way to enforce this, there's no penalty if you don't do this, people want to be known as trustworthy people. So psychologically, if people are asked to even make a very passive pledge saying, hey, do you pledge to compost more? That's actually been shown to be more effective in changing their behavior, because mentally, they will, mentally think like, oh, well, I promised that I would do this, so I want to fulfill my commitments and be a trustworthy person. So even doing voluntary participatory pledges that are purely educational in nature can still have an influence on behavior change. So in terms of the other things to consider too is using persuasion in your marketing. So providing really captivating information instead of saying, oh, pollution is really bad, saying something like, oh, did you know we send 600 tons of trash to the landfill every year as a university? Things that will help frame the situation and actually give people some context so that they feel like there's more things that they want to act upon. Also, knowing your audience is really important because you want to appeal to what they'll care about. So making sure that your marketing information or the way that you're presenting your argument or your project is a way that is presented in a way that your audience will care more is also important to incorporate in your marketing. And of course, like within marketing and trying to influence behavior change, convenience is really important. So making something very easy to do, something very short, just a quick action that they need to do in order to help change their behavior is more likely to be impactful than saying, you need to spend a lot of time doing this, or, you have to go out of your way to go do this. Also, incentives work as well. So if you really want to trigger, immediate action, offering a small incentive. It doesn't have to be big. It could be something as simple as a certificate or a sticker, just something to get people going to try to motivate them to take advantage of your initiative. And in general, there's a lot of great material in community-based social marketing, which is a whole field of study on its own. So highly encourage you to check out the cbsm.com website for interesting case studies and how to apply this in your marketing efforts. So some other tips beyond community-based social marketing is just basic good marketing 101, which you definitely want to incorporate into your sustainability education efforts. So some of the main principles in marketing is that you always want to have a good value proposition. So what that means is really addressing what's in it for me. So WIIFM. So you want to make sure that if you're talking to an audience, you have something that they care about, that there's something in it for them if they listen to you. So making sure that's very clear in your marketing and your presentations and things like that, it's important to integrate. Also, it's really important to build in a call to action if you're going to be providing information on something. So what do you actually want to do, have them do with all this information? So you don't want to just depress someone with like terrible facts about how the planet is falling apart and how everything's awful. You want to make sure there's a clear call to action, such as sign this pledge, do this action, turn off the lights, whatever that is. Make sure that it's actionable. Also, it's really important to provide metrics and feedback when you can. So if you can actually respond back to people with, hey, like this is what we're doing as a university, or hey, this is what this action results in. If you do this, you're going to save, this many pounds of CO2. Anything you can do to kind of provide some feedback to people to have them empowered and really feel like if they do what you're asking them to do, they're going to make a difference. So making sure that you provide that. And also it's good practice too, in terms of even like basic things like tabling, never miss that opportunity to collect customer profile data. So in terms of the people you're reaching, they're your customers. So anything you can learn about them in terms of, where are the learning gaps, or what do they care about, or, where did they go for lunch that day? All of that information is really valuable in terms of designing projects that really address problems. So, in terms of when you're out there doing a tabling event, you don't want to just say, hey, here's the information, have a good day and bye. You want to make sure that you have something that's actually collecting their thoughts and collecting their feedback, or even just collecting like how who you interacted with, because that's all valuable information that we can use for projects. So hopefully that was useful in terms of getting a little bit of background in terms of how the university works, how to improve your sustainability marketing moving forward. If you'd like, there is a comprehension quiz available in the description section of this YouTube video, which you're welcome to take. Regardless, we hope this helps you in communicating our message to the campus. And thanks so much for your help.